So thank you for this introduction. I would like to thank Professor Alexandre Mebaza for this opportunity to work on this project. This is my preliminary result of my PhD that I'm doing right now. And we will talk about acute kidney injury, more than heart failure, and discover a little bit what is Galectin-3 as a biomarker of renal prognosis. First of all, as an introduction, acute kidney injury and kidney damage has a definition which has evolved a lot the last decades. As an ICU physician, creatinine is not enough. It's too late. Patients have a decrease of renal function, and what we want to be able to do is to manage patients before this point. So that's a really point for the use of the biomarkers, and that's the reason why in 2020, Maurice Osterman changed a little bit and proposed a new definition in AKI group, which include biomarker for the definition of acute kidney injury. As a matter of fact, here we have a new stage, which is 1S, which define patient with no renal function loss, but kidney damage defined with a biomarker. Now, what is Galectin-3? It's an unspecified protein for an unspecified organ. But what is very interesting is that in cardiovascular study, high grade of Galectin-3 was associated with the incidence of cardiovascular event. Moreover, they find in 2013 that high grade and high level of Galectin-3 was associated with heart failure. But it's not enough to talk about acute kidney injury. As a matter of fact, here in this study, in a subgroup of patients with an eGFR under 90 milliliter per minute, we found that high grade of Galectin-3 was well associated with the mortality and the prognosis. And even more, we found that the level of Galectin-3 was associated with a poor eGFR, moreover, for patients with the severity of patients. So my study want to use Galectin-3 in an ICU patient to identify renal prognosis. This is the idea using FROG-ICU. We took 2,076 patients admitted in FROG-ICU who has a plasma Galectin-3 dosage at admission, and we identified two objectives. The first one was to identify renal prognosis using major adverse kidney events, which combine renal replacement therapy, no renal recovery, and mortality. And the secondary objective was to define the balance between mortality or the kidney damage. Result. Wow, that's good. We found a high level of Galectin-3 that was associated with MAKE, and this is what we were expecting. Moreover, after a multivariate analysis and after adjustment on the severity scores and the confounding factor associated with no renal recovery, we found that still associated. The area under the receive operating characteristic curve was 0.76, which is quite interesting. But let's talk a little bit about something. Major adverse kidney events is combine renal injury and mortality, which is a global outcome. So we need to understand what is the balance between the one and the other. That's the reason why we've gone further, and we've studied high level of Galectin-3 that was associated with, first of all, mortality here, and with the severity of acute kidney injury here defined by CADIGO stage, CADIGO 1, 2, and 3. Moreover, in a multivariate analysis, it remained associated even after adjustment with mortality and acute kidney injury. So this is interesting because this biomarker is a good value for prognosis of mortality, which is global outcome, and acute kidney injury. Moreover, the area under the receive operating characteristic curve was 0.77 for acute kidney injury, and which was better than for mortality, which was 0.70. Finally, let's just open a little the discussion, and I told you that as an ICU physician, we need biomarker to identify one stage, which is A1S stage, acute kidney injury. That's the reason why we use Galectin-3 here as a comparison with another kidney biomarker, which is NGAL. NGAL has been known in the literature to be a good biomarker of acute kidney injury, and we correlated with Galectin-3. That we found that it was well correlating with 0.63 factor. Moreover, if you define subclinical AKI, which is stage 1S, with NGAL, you can find that Galectin-3 has a predictive performance of 0.76 for subclinical AKI, which is quite interesting. That's the reason why we're gonna go further, and at the conclusion of this presentation, that in ICU, Galectin-3 was well associated with the renal prognostic and global prognostic. But here, my PhD is now introduced. Let's go to further studies. And we need to know how Gal3 mediates these deleterious effects, first of all. And second of all, as clinical data, we want to go further into renal phenotyping as specific damage, first of all, and second of all, as subclinical acute kidney injury. I thank you for this presentation, and this is a collaboration between three different entities, mascot, with François Després, Alexandre Lebaza, and Etienne Gaïa, Corakid with Christos Hadjikristos, and in UCSF, Mathieu Legrand. Thank you for your attention.
So, if there is some question, Professor Di Somma.
Thank you very much. This is very interesting. I just would like to address last slide that you say what we can do now, right? So do you have an idea what is Galectin-3 mirroring? I think that Galectin-3 in some way mirroring kidney fibrosis or something like that. So I don't think that there is any way to reverse. It is simply mirroring the fact there is some, probably, I don't know, I ask you, undergoing fibrosis. So the question is, did you measure Galectin-3 after the evidence that you have AKI? I don't know, 1 week later, if there is a modulated, because as you say, this will be a target of a therapeutical, but effect of treatment. So do you have an idea what is representing? How can we manage eventually this?
Okay. I'm going to take two angles to answer this question. The first one is, yes, it could be very interesting to evaluate Galectin-3 at discharge in ICU of patient, just to monitor the renal remodeling after having an acute kidney injury. As a matter of fact, it has been done. With François, we explored this point. It was associated with the severity of acute kidney injury, but still remain a problem because when patient died, they don't have a renal recovery. That's one point. The other point, more preclinical data. I heard you talked about fibrosis and Galectin-3. This is quite true, but there's another fact in the kidney, and Galectin-3 is associated with fibrosis, but moreover, it's inside the tubules. And when you have an acute kidney patient, you have a liberation of this Galectin-3 inside the renal, and that bring some particular inflammatory cells that will do some remodeling and fibrosis. The interesting point would be to inhibit Galectin-3 and to find if we can just limit this renal remodeling and increase patient outcome. Here, it's only for preclinical data. It's my PhD, and it has been to be verified in a clinical cohort, which is very complicated as Galectin-3 is not such a specific of kidney, and there's a lot of confounding factors associated with that.
As you have noticed before, and from the question from Frank, this is a troponin club. So most of the people in the room believe that troponin is really a good biomarker. So also for your paper, if you want to convince your readers and audience that for the prediction of death, this signal is of value, you need to play with troponin. That's one suggestion. And the second suggestion, and perhaps a comment from your side, if you have already done so, some of us are really old-fashioned, and you have bashed creatinine and creatinine assessment. However, in your model, you have not dared to compete one-to-one against, for example, eGFR. So consider eGFR, or that would be kind of calculated, estimated glomerular filtration rate based on old-fashioned serum creatinine. And then this would allow you to see whether Galectin-3, or because it correlates so strongly with creatinine, is even better than measuring or assessing renal function with eGFR. I think that would be, perhaps you've done so or not, it would be,
Yes,
might be a suggestion.
it's very interesting. We submitted this paper just recently, and in the paper we estimated with CKD EPI the eGFR, and it was well correlated with 0.69 with a raw factor. So we already done that. And in kidney we don't have troponin because it's not kidney, but we have creatinine. And the problem of creatinine is that when you evaluate it and you have an increase of creatinine, it's too late. As an anesthesiologist, for example, in perioperative patient, you will have an increase of creatinine after the surgery, but it's too late. So what we need to do is to identify, and I think somebody told it just yesterday, to identify before the surgery the patient with some risk. And biomarker here can be very interesting. As a matter of fact, there's a notion which is called the several hit or multiple hits. And when you're a young person, you can have one hit, you won't have a decrease of renal function. But after the first hit, which is you get hit by a car, but you will have a second hit, which is a sepsis, and the third hit, which is a cardiogenic shock, and then you will have a decrease of renal function, which is too late. So biomarker can help us to be before this stage. And this is the point of using Galectin-3, but it's not enough. Galectin-3 don't have any, is not enough.
Okay, thank you, Louis. It's time for next